My name is Stephanie Height. I'm the Deputy Director at the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. And for all my planning friends with AICP, I just wanted to make a real quick announcement just to remind you that you must attend the entire conference to get all the credits. Okay, you're on your honor. And then we also have evaluation sheets out front. If you could please fill out one of those and turn it in, that would be great. And then remember, you're responsible for logging your CM credits. So welcome. Thank you for coming and have a great day. Dr. Miroff? And Dr. Miroff is our host today, so be kind.
Jesus, this is too short. Welcome, everybody. Wow. Welcome to Florida Atlantic University. My name is Dan Miroff, and I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, and I'm a professor of civil engineering. It is our tremendous honor to host the joint annual meeting for the Treasure Coast and South Florida Regional Planning Councils. I actually attended the first two meetings. There was 2 years ago on... Clicker is here. Clicker is here. I actually attended the first meeting that was held in this room about 2 years back. It was on waste management, and last year in Fort Lauderdale on the recycling topic. And I'm very, very excited to explore this year's topic on the silver tsunami. Is it still working? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. But first I wanted to let you know a little bit about our little university. We were founded in 1961 on the grounds of an Army air base, and it is a public doctoral granting institution that's classified by Carnegie as very high research activity. It has grown to be the 72nd largest public university in the country. We currently have 32,500 students on our 6 campuses, and those campuses are spread across 110 miles of southeast Florida coastline from Dania Beach to Fort Pierce. We have more than 30% of our students are first generation, and 40% of our students are low income or Pell eligible. We're a Hispanic serving institution that's designated by the U.S. Department of Education, and we offer degrees in undergraduate, graduate, and PhD programs across many, many important fields, including business, engineering, science, education, arts, humanities, health, medicine, and social sciences. FAU is also the most diverse public university in the state system, and we are ranked 36th in social mobility by U.S. News and World Report. We're a leader in affordability because our graduates have 11% less loan debt than the national average, and we're ranked number 6 in the country in best bang for the buck by Washington Monthly. We have 208,000 alumni working in all 50 states and across the world. And we have an award-winning undergraduate research program. So Florida Atlantic will play a critical role in the broader economy, driving innovation, providing workforce development, and serving as a hub for research collaboration. FAU will help drive the future solutions to the upcoming silver tsunami, which is the topic of our meeting today. And it refers to the rapidly growing population of older adults who are entering into retirement age and beyond. South Florida will experience this demographic shift more acutely than most regions in the U.S. because we are a retirement destination. Today in this conference, we'll explore some of these challenges with respect to increased demand for healthcare services and infrastructure, including addressing the shortage of caregivers, healthcare providers, and assisted living facilities. Just to give you a small piece of information, 48% of our students actually have either a child at home or an older adult that they take care of while they're doing their studies here at FAU. We're also looking into the shifting housing market as older adults downsize and renovate their homes with independence and accessibility in mind to make aging in place easier. Issues like labor shortages and workforce demands, transportation and mobility issues, social safety nets and support services, and I hope that we don't forget that we must join the fight to combat ageism and the effects of social isolation while protecting our seniors from that extreme element of the population that preys upon the elderly. The silver tsunami will require proactive planning and investment in healthcare, housing, transportation, and community services to support South Florida's aging population, while also providing economic and social opportunities that benefit residents of all ages. Once again, I want to thank you for attending and welcome you again to Florida Atlantic University. I wish you to have a great conference filled with opportunities for collaboration to foster the development of innovative solutions that will make our communities safer, more independent, and more vibrant. Go Owls.
Thank you. Are these on? They are? Can you all hear me? Ooh, I'll use my outside voice. Good morning. I'm Vice Mayor Maria Marino of Palm Beach County. And before Senator Geller and I say our remarks, I know we have several elected officials in the room, but since I don't have a list, I'd actually like for you just to stand up and state where you are. So, Commissioner Woodward, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Commissioner Woodward, Palm Beach County, District 4. Laura Moss, Amy River.
Larry Lee, St. Lucie County, District 2.
John Carroll, City of Vero Beach.
Frank Kaplan, Village of Key Biscayne.
Craig Cates, Commissioner, Monroe County.
Carolyn Cassidy, Town of Ocean Ridge. Linda Voss, representing State Representative Post Fremont.
Thank you all for being here. Oh,
Where?
oh, I turned quickly.
Commissioner Clary, City of Hollywood.
Left to left, representing Chief Financial Officer Jim Jonas.
Senator Rich.
Senator Nan Rich, Broward County Commission, currently serving as the mayor for another week. Moving on back to the county commission, and I also serve as chair of our area agency on aging in Broward County.
Well, again, thank you all for being here. Steve and I are going to take a couple minutes to just say why we're here and what we're doing. And in 1985, when I came to Florida to play golf, and I never left, I used to joke and say, well, you know, the old folks live on the East Coast, and their folks live on the West Coast. So here I am years later, and I live on the East Coast, and my folks live with me. They are 89 and 92. I moved them in with me about 6 years ago. So as we're talking about the silver tsunami, I experience it every day. They both drive, by the way. They both still have their licenses, and they both still have their mental capabilities, so I am very, very blessed. But they spend most of their days driving to doctor's offices. And when it comes to the point where they can't drive anymore, how are they going to get around? And what is the roadway network going to look like? And I am blessed that they still do have their licenses and drive. I kind of worry when they do that, but you know, like any good daughter, I don't want to take their keys away from them because I don't want them to think that they're incapable. That's a decision that they are both smart enough to make themselves. And I do know that because I see my mom driving less and less. But anyway, we're stuck now with an area that is called Wall Street South. So not only is the silver tsunami here, we've got everyone coming because they see the opportunities that South Florida has given to them. COVID brought people down here, and when I was talking to a commercial realtor, he said, Maria, they were always coming. It's just that COVID speeded up the process because now they know they can work from home. And when they're done working from home and they want to get in their car and they want to go to a restaurant or they want to go, you know, to the spa or play golf. I said I came down to play golf. You know, we have 140 some odd golf courses just in Palm Beach County. Anybody play golf in the room? Oh, come on, more hands than that. It's valuable land. And how many of your communities have turned golf courses into communities, into more housing? That's another thing that we face. And what's the land planning that goes into that? So we've got an interesting day, lots to talk about today. And Senator Geller, I'm going to let you take over. Remember, I gave him some of my 5 minutes.
Why, thank you, Maria. Good morning. I'm Steve Geller, the chair of the South Florida Regional Planning Council, and other titles. if you look around, you'll notice that the room is pretty full, and there will be more people coming because my GPS told me it would take me 55 minutes to get here. Lying bastard. It took me an hour and 35 minutes to get here, so I'm sure other people, I'm sure other people are still coming in. Yeah. But the fact that the room is full and more people will be coming, we had to, in fact, stop registration because we couldn't fit more people in this room, shows you how important this issue is. If you're a public policy maker and you are not being kept awake at night by the upcoming silver tsunami, it just proves that you're not paying attention, because it is a huge problem. Let me tell you what today is and what today will not be. We are not going today to give you the answers to the silver tsunami because we're here for 7 hours and that would not scratch the surface. What I'm hoping what we will do, and one of the reasons I pushed for this topic, is to let people know, public policymakers know, just the extent of the different problems, and maybe you'll hear the beginnings of some possible suggestions for how to deal with them. But don't expect that when you leave here you're going to say, oh great, I was there for 7 hours and I now can solve all of these issues. There are several issues we'll be dealing with. One, which I find immensely concerning, is that I'll be able to retire. I'm 66. I have a pension. I have retirement savings. Famous three-legged stool. Presumably I'll have Social Security, and that's the three-legged stool. Savings, Social Security, and pensions. However, today only 11% of private sector employees have pensions. Yeah, they have retirement savings, but don't get confused by the average number, and the numbers are all over the place. I've seen 600,000 as an average, but that's not the median. That's distorted by people with very large numbers. The median's only about 100,000, meaning 50% have more and 50% have less. Good luck on retiring on that. With the gig economy, people love it. Hey, I'm a 1099. I get my entire check. They're not paying into Social Security. And by not paying into Social Security, when they do retire and they do get Social Security, it's not going to be very much because it's based on paying based on what you paid in. So I don't know how people are going to retire. One thought is just and I hope that we'll hear some discussion on this. I've been looking at this for a couple of years now. Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, just those 3 counties, and there are 7 counties in the combined South Florida and Treasure Coast Regional Planning Councils, but just those 3 have a population of around 6.1 million people, which would put us the same size as Maryland or Missouri, either 18th or 9th largest state. Some states have set up their own retirement plans, not pensions, but just a way to encourage small businesses to provide a 401k or IRAs for their employees. Is this something that perhaps the large counties can consider banding together to do? Let's look at other issues you'll be hearing about. Housing. Do we need to deal with zoning and land use issues to encourage senior housing near hospitals or near universities? Do we need to deal with ADUs, accessory dwelling units, aka granny flats? Do we need to have zoning code changes to deal with wider doorways, lower sills for walkers or wheelchairs? Fastest growing group of homeless are seniors. And in Florida, particularly with all of the condo issues that we're going through, this is immense problem, and we're not even going to be able to get into that condo issue today. Transit, how are seniors going to get around when they're not driving any longer? Do we need longer crosswalks for people trying to cross streets? Community shuttles, micro-transit. This is just an overview of some of the issues that I hope we're going to be dealing with today. We're not going to give you all of the answers because we don't have the time. but we hope that we'll get people thinking, and we hope that there will be follow-up meetings, whether of this group or our two regional planning councils separately, or individuals working together. So this is an overview of what we'll be doing today. And our first speaker is the Deputy, I want to get his title, Chief of Staff, Deputy Director, and Director of Economic Development and Research for the South Florida Regional Planning Council, Randy DeShazo. Randy, thank you, and you're up.
Thank you very much. Has anyone seen a clicker around?
We took it. We hit it.
All right. Good morning, everyone. As you've just heard, the United States is undergoing an epic demographic transition. The baby boomer generation, everyone born between 1946 and 1964, is aging, and in that aging process is reshaping our economy, our communities, even the size and composition of our family units. I think as a little bit of what we heard, who lives in our households, and perhaps even looking forward, there may be new challenges, some of which Senator Gillard didn't even really touch on, such as we might expect more loneliness, and some of our urban planning challenges might have to tackle issues of ensuring sociability for the older Americans. But there's a lot more to all of this that I think is really important. As community leaders, as elected officials, you have a window of opportunity here. Presently, 3 out of every 4 baby boomers is over the age of 65. By 2030, it's going to be about half of baby boomers who will be over the age of 75. Those are very distinctly different demographic categories. And looking in terms of those next few years as a window of opportunity to think about how we're going to meet those challenges, this is what we hope to start tackling today. Now, forecasters have long since dropped their crystal ball and have transitioned to really cool charts, some of which I'll show you here today. This chart does actually not only tell us about the past, but it tells us a lot about what we might expect in the future. What you see here is the total fertility rate, births per woman in the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century till 2022. And what it shows is how many children born to a woman on an average, from a very high of around 8 or 9 children at the very beginning of the 19th century and falling pretty consistently until the 1920s, and then it took a nosedive during the Great Depression, where it fell below this green line that you see here. The green line is the replacement rate. That's about 2.1 children per woman, and the population only really began to grow again at a great rate after World War II, where we see this red line here. That's the baby boomer generation, everybody born between 46 and 64. And that births per woman peaked at about 3.7 children, and then it started to fall through the 1960s, falling again below the replacement rate around 1970 to about 2.0 children per woman, and staying below that until today, where it's about 1.7 children per woman. So there are a lot of things that we can pull from just this one chart. One thing I want to point to is that if you are the generation that gave birth to the baby boomers, you can expect to have somewhere between 6 to 12 grandchildren. You also have a lot of children yourself, between 2 to 4 children, who are perhaps available to help you with elder care as you might need it as you age. For the generation that comes after, for the baby boomers themselves, they're below that replacement rate. They're going to have to figure out which kid likes them the most to help them as they age and need more assistance. So Again, there are a lot of challenges here. Another thing that I think I might pull out here is as family sizes diminish in size, we again might expect issues with loneliness that we may want to address, as I mentioned before. All right. Now, the United States is not alone in the world when it comes to aging. What you see here up at the top are two triangles. The one to the left is what you call your traditional population pyramid. It's a distribution of the population from a lot of younger people at the bottom, up, until you get to relatively few older people up at the top. This is your traditional or historical population pyramid. But when you have low immigration and a low birth rate, that population pyramid inverts over time so that you have a lot of older people supported by relatively few younger people. What you see here on these pink and blue charts are projections for the year 2050 produced by the US Census for Japan, for example, which really shows you what that inverted triangle is likely to look like, where there are many retired people who are going to be supported by a relatively small base of working age people, and that's the dependency ratio, about 74 retirement age people for every 100 workers. That's a significant burden that they're already facing and are already struggling with in terms of maintaining the vitality of their economy. China, somewhat of a similar case, only because this is because of a one-child policy that they implemented, and they realized rather late in the game that, in fact, they're facing a lot of trouble in the future. Now, Canada and the United States are similar to each other. They've got this beehive-like structure, which means that they've somewhat adjusted for a low birth rate with a lot of immigration. And in this way, they've been able to keep up the size of their labor force. The labor force is one of the key aspects I'll get into about what actually keeps an economy going. Now, as I mentioned, immigration is one of those key factors in keeping the population growing. We know it's a very controversial, contentious kind of issue, so I won't go too much into it here, but I want to point out some of the projections that the US Census has produced in recent years to compare and contrast what the US population growth would be between 2025 and 2050, assuming the normal background immigration rate. We're talking about the population of the United States peaking by 2080. It will start to decline after that point. If we cut off immigration today, legal, not so legal, immigration today, the peak year of US population is 2025. It is downhill from there. All right, so this is an important question and perhaps a little outside of our scope today, but it is in the background. Now I'm going to shift a little bit to our regions. On the left is a chart comparing our 7 counties, which I call Southeast Florida, versus the state. Now, the numbers might be a little too small for you to read. This is also an eye chart test here today. So cover your left eye and you tell me what is happening with labor force population. The University of Florida, which produces these forecasts through the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, forecasts a continuing growth in the labor force population over the next 25 years. It is a positive outlook. But what's important here is how much the over 65 cohort is going to grow, fairly significantly, about 30 or so percent. And then the over 85 population, which comes close to tripling in size. So when we talk about the challenges we face as community leaders, as planners, this is where we're going to start focusing our attention. Now, breaking this down by county, again, a lot of this is hard to read. I recommend that you download our slides from our websites after the conference so you can take a look at what each county says. But it's the same story here. Significant growth in the over 65 cohort, but really significant growth, more than doubling, even tripling in a few cases, depending on the county, in the over 85 population. Same for Treasure Coast. I won't belabor this too much because time is relatively short, but I will switch my attention to the bigger picture of the economy and why all of this matters. All right, so this is a chart of the U.S. labor force participation rate. If you think of the U.S. population as a pie, the pie keeps on growing, or is currently growing because of immigration and our natural increase that we already still maintain. However, the slice of that pie, the share of people who are actually either looking for work or are working, is shrinking relative to the size of the rest of the population. If that continues to shrink, we will see significant impacts to our economy. Now, it's not actually a giant drop. It looks fairly steep, but it's starting about 67% participation rate in 2000, and then it starts to drop down to about 61% at the very end of the forecast at around 2024. So it's a gradual decline, and it raises part of the question of, are we facing a silver tsunami, or are we talking about a metaphor that's more like sea level rise? We'll talk about all that. All right, another thing that really matters in terms of the shape of our future economy is how much do we spend? Our economy is based in no small part on consumption. Now, what you see here are two bars. One is for the 65 age cohort, and the light green color, which I'm sure is really hard to see in all this light, is 75 years old. And what we're doing is we're comparing their change in spending relative to prime age consumers, the 45 to 54-year-old age group of householders. And what you'll see is, perhaps not too surprising, is that older Americans are spending more on reading and healthcare, but a lot less across every other consumption category. And this is important not just in terms of talking about what the future of our economy is, it also says a lot about the demand for commercial space. If you're thinking as a land use planner, this also has implications for what the demand for commercial space might start to look like. All right, this is a lot of words. No need to really go into it a whole lot, but I will start talking a little bit about Japan. Japan is going to be my beanbag here in this particular talk, because one thing that I think might help encapsulate it all is that Japan's gross domestic product per capita today is more than 30% less than what it was in 2012. So in 12 years, they took a significant nosedive. Not all of it is due to aging. There are other things going on with their economy, but that is the very single largest piece of that decline. All right, again, I'm not going to surprise anybody here by talking about how expensive it is to get older. However, I do want to point out one statistic that I think is really significant here, that the Medicare costs of dialysis alone account for almost 1% of the federal budget, which is significantly more than what we spend on NASA. All right. So the rest of this you can come back to later as you like. Now, getting back to Senator Geller's point about whether or not we can even afford to retire. This is a chart comparing a few industrialized countries in terms of their household savings rate. From 2017, sorry, the numbers are sometimes hard to read, up until 2023, 24. And what you'll see is that this big, thick line down towards the bottom is the United States average household savings rate. We are among the lowest in the industrialized world for how much we save. We have always been like that for a variety of cultural and other reasons. But what has surprised me about this is that Japan's savings rate is even lower. Now, around 2010 and before, Japan had one of the highest savings rates in the entire world. And it's always how I thought of it, is that they're frugal and they save their money. But that has dropped. It has dropped enormously since 2012, because what we see is that many Japanese people are staying in the labor force for longer, but they're earning relatively less, which means that they're burning through their savings. And it is a concern for where we go as a country next. All right, so this is a little bit different than Senator Geller's tripod. This is savings and investments. In one group, wage income. A lot of people will be forced to stay in the workforce for even longer. And then there's a question of pensions. There's a lot of concern about not just private sector pensions, that not everybody has a private sector pension, but a lot of state pensions are increasingly underfunded. And depending on what happens on interest rates and other things, it is likely to become even more underfunded. When I worked in Illinois, I was in the system where it was only 44% funded. Florida is in a much better situation, but still not quite 100%. All right, another thing we hear about is, oh, Social Security is going to go broke. Well, perhaps not. But the trust is facing insolvency, and perhaps by 2035, according to the Social Security folks, we may see cuts in benefits of as much as 23%. Now, in our broader region, Social Security, that is OASI, and hospital insurance together are about 9-10% of all personal income. So if we see about a quarter of cut in that income, that affects everybody's pocketbook. That has a rollover effect that eventually comes to about $1,000 less per person per year because of those cuts. That is equivalent of about 50,000 jobs underperforming the trend and what we might otherwise expect in a growing economy. All right, so there are fiscal cascades. That means that the loss of these funds just don't stop there. It also means that that if we have a poor population base, we also strive to protect that population. So we have legislation that protects poor Americans over the age of 65 who are income constrained, and they get additional homestead exemption. What that means, of course, is that if you're a younger homeowner, that means that you're taking on a greater share of the tax burden, even as local governments have to reconsider the size and scope of the services they offer because the overall tax base is likely to shrink. So what's the good news here? Well, there's still other tough choices that we're going to face. There's still climate change. There's still sea level rise. Will we have to consolidate schools? We have a lot of great decisions, and we've got until 4 o'clock to figure out what to do about it. All right. So the next thing I want to head on here is something that's kind of, I guess, a little bit of a shock factor. Earlier on, I said that the over 65 set is growing pretty significantly. That's likely to affect how many Medicaid patient days. What you see here in the dark blue line is what the current Medicaid patient days are among our different counties. And then if that particular age segment grows proportionate to what the forecast from the University of Florida says it will, those days will increase by the amount that the blue line indicates. So some pretty dramatic changes based on which county you're in. Now, if you're making use of assisted living facility beds, adult daycare, special nursing facility beds, you're looking at a more than doubling and even a tripling of that need. That's not even considering that you may still be in greater need than the previous generation because of the smaller family support that you might have had in the past, right? So this is just the proportionate change. This is a dramatic change, and of course, as community leaders, you need to think about how to plan for the change in demand. All right, this is another good one because this is emergency and lifeline capacity. So when we do have storms, and we may be having more storms or at least more intense storms, this is our current need for electricity-dependent residents, special needs, so on and so forth. I did not do a projection. These numbers are scary enough if you just look at the numbers and think, what is this times 2 or times 3? Gosh, I can't do that math. So we're getting towards the end here, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are both opportunities. In the past, one of the things that we've seen is that there's been a lot of discussion of impending residential downsizing, and that would open up the housing stock for younger homeowners. However, that does not seem to be what a lot of aging baby boomers want to do. They typically want to age in place, and something like half of them want to upsize their homes. So again, that's talking about constraining the existing supply of the housing stock. However, we do have an opportunity to start rethinking policy, not just at a state and local level, but also at the national level, if we want to talk about how we might help Americans have more children, or think about how do we balance immigration versus automation. Those choices are looming. All right, so just to do a little bit of roundup, in case I skipped a few points. If you were born in 1925, you're going to have an average of 6 to 12 children. If you were born in 1975, you can expect 2 to 4. I think that's a nice way of summarizing a lot of what I wanted to say. The housing stock is currently dominated by older Americans, and if we have continued slow housing production, that will become even more of a squeeze. I'm going to go ahead and cut it here and say thank you and open up for any questions.
We have, I like this, you cut it off so he and I can talk, right?
Yeah.
We have about 8 minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Because we're happy to, while we have the opportunity. Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you. My question is, stand up.
Wait, they're bringing you a mic.
Thank you. My question is, I don't know how to put this delicately, but about life expectancy. Because I know anecdotally in my own family, I had great-grandparents that broke 100, grandparents that broke the 90s. I've lost both of my parents-in-law in their 60s and 70s. And very, very poor health. Like you said, they needed assistance, they needed a lot of medical care towards the end that the previous generations didn't. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that generationally, you know, the baby boom generation. Not that everyone in this room was unhealthy, but there's a stark difference in my own family, and I see it. So could you speak to that?
To the difficulties that the younger generation face, or health-wise? So I think I'm going to have to defer on the life expectancy, because I see like a mixed messages. You know, like on the one hand, we do see people living longer. On the other hand, we do have a lot of obesity in our population. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know where the current wisdom is on what that really means for the health of that older population.
Numbers, excuse me, thank you. Actually, 2 questions. One, this is sort of theory on theory. We had just went through a presentation on sea level rise, and they had mentioned that the sea level would be up roughly 6 feet in 10 years, twice a day, with the King's Tide and so on and so forth. The question that I have raised consistently is, what does that do to the population of Florida? And was that taken into consideration with any of these numbers? Question number 2, COVID. Were these numbers pre-COVID? Did COVID affect these numbers?
Yes, okay. So the first question is that my understanding from the University of Florida is that they're not looking at those external factors like sea level rise. They're looking at births and deaths as their primary methodology, plus a migration rate that they calculate. So the second piece on whether or not where the dating of the projections come in, they're all post-COVID. Now, our life expectancy did drop during COVID, not too surprisingly, and I don't know if it's fully rebounded just yet. So I don't know to what extent University of Florida incorporated all of those new statistics that come in, but I would assume so, since they're updated annually.
Well, I'd say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we go to our next panel, oh, you guys can cheer. And gals. Before we go to our next panel, we did introduce the elected officials in the room, but I'm sure we have some of our Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council members and our South Florida Regional Planning Council members. If you are here, would you please stand up and introduce yourselves? Thank you.
Larry Lee, St. Lucie County Commission.
Frank Kaplan, again, Village of Key Biscayne, South Florida Regional Planning Council.
Thank you.
I stepped down. Denise Orland, City Plantation Council member and South Florida Regional Planning Council.
Thank you. Thank you. We're all here, happy you're here. I had a couple of takeaways, but you know, we're gonna have time at the end of the day to kind of discuss all of our takeaways, so I will leave those for that moment. And would you like me to bring on our next group? Okay. All right, so did we change our nameplates up here? We are doing the responding to an aging population programs and policies. So may I please have Mr. Rothman, Angela Antonelli, the Honorable Jeff Kotkamp, and the Honorable Nan Rich. And Laura Streed. Did I pronounce that right, Laura?
Yes.
Did I get everybody? Okay. I'm only reading my instructions. All right, we're going to give up the stage for you all at this moment.
Never happens. Sorry about that.
Good morning. I am Max Rothman, the president's. Not on? Okay. I am Max Rothman. I'm president and CEO of the Alliance for Aging, the area agency on aging for Miami-Dade and Monroe counties. The deep end of the pool, as I've learned this morning. One of the blessings of the 21st century is that we are living longer, we're working longer, and we're contributing to our communities longer. But there are challenges. There are great challenges, as we've just heard. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. What are the programs and policies that can help us meet these challenges? Very briefly, our panel, quite distinguished group, perhaps the most I've been with this year. Professor Angela Antonelli is a research professor and executive director at Georgetown University Center for Retirement Initiatives. the Honorable Jeff Kotkamp, Vice President of Florida Tax Watch and former Lieutenant Governor of Florida. The Honorable Nan Rich, a dear friend from her time in the Florida legislature, is the Mayor of Broward County, former State Senator, District 34, and Chair of the Area Agency on Aging in Broward County. And Laura Streed, Senior Associate State Director for AARP Florida. So welcome to our panel. Thank you for all participating with us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Antonelli.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll see how well I can manage negotiating these slides, as always. Okay, well, thanks to everybody, and to the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and the South Florida Regional Planning Council for finding me and for bringing me here to Florida. Although I have to say, full disclosure, I love Florida. We have a place in Florida, so big fan. So really thrilled to be here and be able to spend time with you. So with Randy's presentation, obviously, it paints a picture of the demographic trends that we're facing, both in the United States and globally with respect to our aging population, and what the financial consequences of that is going to be for us as we look to the future. What I hope to share with you, and I know I have very little time, and Esmeralda's probably going to take the thing and pull me off stage, is get a professor and tell her that she's got 5 minutes to talk. That never happens. So I'll try to be as fast as possible. I appreciate it. So what I'm hoping to share with you is a little bit of hopeful news about things that we're working on, both at the federal and at the state level. States are innovators and leaders, and so I really welcome the opportunity to be here in Florida to talk about this with policymakers here in the audience. If you haven't heard about these kinds of initiatives, happy to talk to you more about them, but I'm really excited about the progress that we're making, and it's really important. And I'm passionate about this. I'm first generation. I'm old, but my parents, came to the United States decades ago. My mom and dad worked low-wage jobs. I had the blessings of being able to go to 2 very good schools, not accumulate a lot of student loan debt, but the reality is I took care of my mom. I took care of my parents my whole life once I started working, and my mom for over 20 years lived with us, and I cared for her. So she just passed away a couple of years ago. This is an issue. I've worked on lots of domestic issues over my lifetime. This opportunity to work on financial security for all Americans and older Americans is just really a passion of mine at this stage in my life. So let me get going here, because I've probably already taken up all of my time. So in terms of the aging population, again, I don't want to repeat what Randy was already saying, but again, we're going to see an explosive growth in the older population in the United States over the next couple of decades. And again, 10,000 Americans turning 65 every day now until 2030, with actually this year being the peak 65 year, as you heard. By 2029, more than 20% of the population will be over the age of 65. By 2034, they'll outnumber children under the age of 18. And I think the biggest thing is to understand, again, that longevity issue, and that we today, if you're a healthy 65-year-old, you have a good chance of living past the age of 90. A baby born in the past decade is likely to live to be 100 years old. The math challenge that we face is, how in the world are you going to work 20, 30 years, take care of your family, raise children, and at the same time, given your likelihood to live to age 90, save another 20, 30 years so that you can support yourself when you decide to stop working? And, the things that's most stunning is what's happening with our older population. Significant increases in the number of those over the age of 65 that we'll see in the growth of those numbers. But I think really importantly, in terms of these folks over the age of 65, and especially over the age of 75, we're seeing rapid growth in the number of our older Americans who are having to keep working. Well, they may have to keep working. They could also choose to keep working. But many of them are working because they have to, out of necessity. And, the aging population, what it means financially, again, you see in the chart that we have a decreasing number of households that are just, going to be the tax-paying households that are supporting our elderly population. And we're moving right now with our younger populations into their prime working years and the need to save for retirement. I'm not going to go into all of this, but some things I want to pull out. You heard about how little people have saved for retirement. It's quite stunning, those closest to retirement now, how little they actually have saved, and they also don't have a good sense of what that means. Some will think, oh, I have $20,000 or $30,000 saved for retirement. That's going to be great, and it's going to turn, it's going to push out another $20,000, $30,000 a year for me to supplement my Social Security, and that's not even close to reality. So there's a real disconnect in terms of the understanding of how much you need to save and how much that's going to generate at the time of retirement to supplement Social Security. But it's stunning that 27% of those near retirement have literally nothing in terms of retirement savings, either in DB or DC plans. And what's really stunning is the growth of debt that's being carried by our older Americans. And then when you look at the younger generations, again, student loan debt is a crushing debt burden on our younger population that's keeping them from saving to retirement. But what's even stunning is that they're carrying that student loan debt as they age. And actually, among the older populations, that is, for those who are over the age 65 and 75, they are the ones that are carrying significant amounts of debt, and the level of growth in that debt is quite troubling. And then we know with women versus men in terms of many women who are, when they lose their spouse, they have a tendency to, their incomes to significantly drop. They rely heavily on Social Security. But I think the thing we need to think about, and you heard about Social Security, is it's already, as far as I'm concerned, it's already troubling that today, 20%, 1 in 5 Americans rely on Social Security for more than 90% of their income. That's today. And you're hearing what these demographic trends are looking at. Clearly, we've got a challenge before us in terms of retirement insufficiency. The demographic trends in Florida are changing. You're going to see a 54% growth in your elderly population just between now and 2040, and again, a reduction in those households to support that. So the issues that are, one of the issues that we're really focused on is the retirement savings gap. Most people, I think, don't understand that you go get your coffee in the morning, you might go to the hair salon, you go to the grocery store, you buy fruit and vegetables. A lot of these folks don't have retirement savings plans. Most people do not realize that half of working Americans, private sector, go to work every day and their employers do not offer them a way to save for retirement. And in the United States, we have about 57 million American private sector workers that fall into that category. You can see for Florida, the numbers that you have. Your gap is a little bit larger than the national average in terms of your percent of your private sector workforce that goes to work every day and does not have access to a way to save for retirement. And they're 15 times more likely to save for retirement if they have access to an employer-sponsored plan. There's not been progress over the decades to close that access gap. So most people don't realize this has been a persistent gap. So we shouldn't be surprised when we talk about the numbers that we see with respect to the low levels of savings that we see. And a lot of folks, I'll get arguments back from folks when we start talking about these programs that I'll tell you about, well, gee, people can just go down and open their own IRAs. The reality is people do not, on their own, because of inertia, do not go down to Fidelity and open their own IRAs. They just don't. And the reality is a lot of the population that doesn't have access to retirement savings, these are small businesses that often can't afford or have challenges to afford the costs of offering a plan, combined with the fact that many of their workers are low and moderate income. They are not the ones that are going to feel comfortable walking into Fidelity and talking financial savings and opening an IRA. They just don't do it. And that's not only true. I mean, there's a lot of folks that I know that PhDs and they don't do it, or they have access to an employer-sponsored plan and they don't take advantage of what their employers are in fact offering them. So if they have access to a plan, they're much more likely to participate. And then we'll talk about the notion of auto-enrolling people into their retirement plans. And if you auto-enroll them into those plans, they're much more likely to participate. So, and I think this also might have been touched upon, but significant disparities among racial groups with respect to wealth accumulation and retirement savings, where Black and Latino households have a fraction of the retirement savings, and they carry much more significant student loan debt and other types of debt. So states, in so many areas, this is no different, where states are the leaders in driving change and innovation. You are the people who can do this and affect change in Florida, and what you do in Florida affects the rest of the nation. So the notion of these state-facilitated retirement savings programs is really a simple concept of saying, if you're an employer in a state and you're not offering a way to save for retirement, you need to make a decision and do something. Please either go get a plan, and there are many options out there in the private market. And if you don't, the states have created a very simple, low-cost individual retirement type account that we would ask you to auto-enroll your workers in so that they can start to save for retirement. And when they do, 70% of the workers are staying enrolled. They're contributing at a 5% default contribution rate. Now, to be clear, some of the concerns about, oh my gosh, we're requiring employers to take action. Yes, we are. But for workers, it is always voluntary. So workers can always make the decision, even though they're auto-enrolled, to choose to opt out and not save. And as I said, 70% of workers, when they're auto-enrolled, will stay and they will be saving. They put away about $100 a month. These are the states that are doing it. Most of these states fall into this auto IRA model. Several of them are open. I mean, look, politically you can look at this and you can draw some conclusion. I will tell you, in terms of my background, I've worked at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. I've served the Bush administration 41 and 43. When I was at the Heritage Foundation, we worked on establishing College 529 savings plans. No one today would tell me that we should get rid of College 529 savings programs. Many of the state treasurers across the nation are the ones leading this charge. They facilitate college savings programs. They manage those investments. They're now doing it for the ABLE programs, which help families and others support to protect the financial future for disabled young people and adults. So states and treasurers and financial officers have the experience of managing these types of programs very successfully. This is no different. The potential for Florida in terms of the ability to help your workers save can be significant if they can start young. It's always a matter of time and compound interest, and a small amount of money in can make a huge amount of difference over time. And again, some of you may be aware, you know, in 2025, there'll be a lot of tax reform, expiring tax provisions that will be revisited. But there is a savers match provision that was enacted recently that would allow to provide it refundable. So it used to be the savers credit. Now it'll be refundable for those who are low income, who do put some money away. Then there will be a refund back into their IRA for them because they've made that contribution to a retirement account. And again, you can see in the chart, and it's in the one sheet that was given out that we produced at Georgetown, that shows how that little amount of money can actually help to significantly boost the amount of retirement savings and supplement that, and ultimately help to not insignificantly increase the potential retirement supplemental income to Social Security. And so this is really what I want. Pay now or pay later. The projections in terms of the costs to the state of Florida and to the federal government is enormous. We already talked about what that means. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those costs in the entitlement programs are already exploding. And that will only continue to do so. Why are there? Because so many Americans have insufficient retirement savings, and they're heavily dependent on the federal government. Most long-term care, as you know, is covered by Medicaid. So the federal budget costs over the next 20 years, $63 billion is the share that Florida will be looking at due to insufficient retirement income, and $63 billion nationally, and then the state budget costs alone. So what it means to the federal government, because of the resources it provides to Florida, it's $63 billion. The total cost is over $1 trillion to the federal government. Florida is $63 billion of that. And the state budget cost, what it means to Florida alone, not the federal dollars, is $17 billion. It's not insignificant. So again, this is the legislative map. These red and sort of pick your states are the states that have adopted different kinds of retirement savings programs. Again, many of these are auto IRA, but we do have voluntary models that states have considered to put in place that is more voluntary for employers to participate and offer their workers a way to save. We're getting to $2 billion in assets, 223,000 employers who are now offering their workers a way to save, and will soon hit 1 million saver accounts. So for folks who would often say, if you give them this opportunity, they're not going to take advantage of it, this is showing us. This is early stage, just 8 of the states out of the 20 that we have, and the assets are growing rapidly. They've doubled in just the past year. So I'm excited about the fact that more than 1 million Americans are going to be saving for their retirement that possibly 2 or 3 years ago would not have been doing that. And the reality is, even though the balances are still relatively small, we know from surveys that for people who are low and moderate income, even having a little bit of money in an IRA account gives them a lot of financial security. And although it's a retirement account and they shouldn't be using it for emergency savings, if it helps them when their car breaks down to not lose their job, which can be life-changing, these are good positive effects that we're having by helping people to put their own money away. Strong public employer and employee support for these types of programs. In terms of the data, again, lots of tremendous support that it's, for businesses, there's not a lot of cost associated with it. It's designed that way to make the employers essentially have to do little or nothing other than provide a roster and facilitate that payroll contribution into the IRA account. And then again, the biggest thing that I've seen change, I've worked on this for a decade when there were no state programs, and I created the center to advance these state facilitated programs, which I feel so strongly about. And I believe this, but industry didn't believe it, but now they do, is that the effects of these auto IRA policies in the states, saying employers you have to do something, means that we're seeing a huge increase in new plan formation. So that means, again, as I said, employers are being said, either go adopt a plan of your own, and if you don't, then please use the state program. You're going to have to use the state program to help your workers save. Well, guess what? A lot of employers are going into the private market, and they're adopting their own plans. 401k, a different kind of IRA. And so this has been a tremendous positive impact generally in terms of trying to address the access gap nationally. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion. There are a lot of other things that I'm happy to share with you in terms of state level efforts to strengthen financial security for all Americans. And the reality is if we wait and we're just talking about older, it's too late. We're focused on reaching the younger generation of workers and helping to build this culture of savings, living within budgets and means, and what it means ultimately for the quality of life and living a dignified life in retirement. So again, thanks so much for having me.
Just to start the dialogue a little bit, out of all these initiatives around the country, is there any particular one or two programs that you think are most effective and might be appropriate for Florida?
Well, I certainly would love to see Florida adopt a retirement savings plan for private sector workers. And again, there's lots of different ways to define that. In terms of the data that I showed you, and also Florida specific, you have it in that one pager, the potential in terms of the growth of retirement savings and what that means for helping to boost retirement income is significant. And you want to do that. It really, a lot of the workers who are participating in these programs across the country are younger workers. There are a lot of single moms with kids. I tell you the different industries where you have the small businesses who really don't have the resources and the time to set up and offer a retirement plan. This makes it easy, and it's really reaching a population of workers that we really need to reach and help them put some money away for retirement. And again, if necessary, to use it for other purposes. But again, we would like them to save it for retirement. There are other things that the states always are thinking about. Again, I mentioned, whether it's College 529, but that's been around for 25 years now, and the ABLE programs more recently, which states have really come together in bipartisan way. Red states and blue states, Republicans and Democrats, all of the states have these ABLE savings programs, and I think they've been very effective. But some other things that people are thinking about now is, again, how can we help reach the younger generations, save for retirement? So there are things like considering, I don't know if anyone has heard of the sort of idea of baby bonds. So it's the notion of some states looking at putting a few dollars when a baby's born into an account, and then it has to sit there until they're age 18. And then there are guardrails that are put in place, and there's certain things that at the age of 18 that they could have access for. And as adults, if it's helping them put a down payment on a house or to keep that money in retirement. For older Americans, you have the concept of building long-term care insurance pools. So Washington Cares, it's just one state at this point, but again, states are sort of these little laboratories of democracy and trying things, where in the state they have one half of 1% of a payroll deduction. It's a tax, I understand that. But that money goes into a pool for all Washingtonians to have the ability, and they can claim if they needed some of those resources to help pay for long-term care. So there are these kinds of state innovative notions that are getting kicked around, and I think it's great, and we need to be dealing with that.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Professor Antonelli. We do appreciate it. Next is Lieutenant Governor Cotcamp.
Yes, sir.
Vice President of Florida Tax Watch, recently came out with a very interesting report concerning long-term care. Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, it's, just to drill down a little bit more on some of the statistics that we've heard. We're going to continue to grow by 2030. At least another 1 million people will live in Florida, and we'll rapidly get at that 25 million mark, and about 1 out of 3 people are going to be 65 and older. So clearly some challenges. We're going to see the surpluses that the legislature has had over the last several years. That's going to go away. And one thing, it's not really the subject of today, but it's important for funding for programs for the elderly. We had an undercount in the census in 2020 of about 750,000 people. We're losing between 11 and 21 billion dollars, and we lost 1 or 2 congressional seats. So we have to be very in tune to making sure we get an accurate count in 2030 because of these continuing demands of our aging population here in Florida.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more specifically what's in the report, Aging in Place, the Economic and Fiscal Value of a Home and Community-Based Services.
Well, we're not putting nearly enough emphasis on this idea of aging in place. And when you look at the benefits of home and community-based care as opposed to a nursing home or assisted living facility, first of all, you got to think psychologically. That's going to be a place people are going to be far happier, and if they're happier, they're probably going to have better health outcomes. We've put some numbers on this. We think just putting greater emphasis on this can save Florida about $750 million a year. We have a program now that has a waiting list, and if we just reduce that waiting list by 1%, we're going to save $63.7 million a year or so. So we have some recommendations we can talk about later as well, but the idea of helping people stay at home as long as possible has benefits beyond just money, and I think we really need to look harder at that, and we've got to fund that.
Any specific recommendations as to how the state of Florida in 2025 can address those issues at a level consistent with reducing those waiting lists, which we, in the work that I do, I confront them every day.
Yeah, so as I said, just reducing the waiting list by 1% is pretty significant savings. So it's just, you're either going to pay a ton of money through Medicaid, or you can fund these alternative programs to help people age in place. We do think, in our report, we think that we need to develop some measures, not just for quality outcomes on the health side, but quality of life. We forget that. We don't talk enough about that, because psychologically, if you're happy, you're going to be healthier, and it's just going to be better for the aging population. So we need quality measures, which we really haven't developed. We need some empirical studies, again, to look at this relationship between aging in place and the home and community-based care versus nursing home and settings away from the home. And we really need to do a better job of recognizing this contribution of families. So we have about, I'm thinking almost 3 million now. Almost 3 million people in Florida are caring for an elderly family member. Most of that's just coming out of their pocket, but they're saving the state a ton of money. So we need to come up with a program. Maybe it's a voucher program, maybe it's some other program where we recognize that contribution and we help families care for their family. and get back to the way we used to do things. Instead of institutionalizing everybody and spending a ton of money through Medicaid, we think it would be far better to recognize these family caregivers and give them some assistance.
I think we would all agree that rebalancing the level of funding that's going into institutional care versus home and community-based care is something we can all get our arms around. I think the challenge is, how do we implement legislatively and budgetarily the steps in order to accomplish that?
Yeah, I think this almost comes grassroots. You know, you jump in here.
Okay.
Mayor Rich.
I'm gonna jump in here. I'll just use two words: fund it. Fund it. That's number one. We know what the needs are. We know every year we have people representing our area agency on agings across the state that go to Tallahassee, that work with the legislators, and give them the information and show them the waiting lists. You have them. We have them. Everybody in this room who has an area agency has waiting lists, whether it's home and community-based care, whether it's Alzheimer's disease. You just run down the list. And we come back with, if we're lucky, a pittance every year, a few $1 million, $10 million. What does that do? It doesn't fund the needs. And if we're really serious about not putting people into nursing homes, we have to have the alternatives. And the answer, as far as I can see, is funding it. And I just want to say, I came here kind of today to talk about kind of localizing this and critical needs in our communities. I understand everything that you were talking about, but right now we have a crisis in our community when it comes to seniors. And the biggest crisis of all is affordable housing. And I can start by going back to when the seniors, many of them came here in the 50s and later, 70s and so forth, and they bought condos, okay? Now we have a serious crisis with the condos, okay? We had the collapse of the Champlain Towers in Surfside, and that started a whole thing about insurance and paying for all the repairs that needed to be taken care of. And I'm sorry, but the legislature did not respond to that issue about that. And a lot of those people now can't afford the homes that they're in. So, and they've been there for years and years and years. So we are trying to, one of the suggestions, which we will not do, is that we should buy the condos. That suggestion has come to our county through one of our commissioners, not this one sitting here. But that's not what we're going to be able to do. There are certain things that the legislature has to do, and we send people up. We pay people, lobbyists, to go and work with the legislators every year, as I said, and we have to do a better job, I guess. And really, you know, I remember years ago, and you will remember this, we used to bring people up to Tallahassee. When Jeb Bush agreed to a bill on having to do with people with epilepsy, cerebral palsy, we had people in the front row expressing and showing what the needs are. And we're back to that as far as I'm concerned with this. I want to just, I don't know if you want to wait for this, but and let me just say that buying, we got an estimate from our finance department for the county, what it would cost to begin to buy condos. And it was anywhere from $300 million to over $6 billion, depending on the cost of them. And that's not something that our county can do, nor do I believe any county should be doing. We have to be doing it in other ways. I just, you know, I think that really the focus comes down on how we provide. We're doing several things in Broward County. We have a strong and expanding eviction prevention program. We have to keep people from being, you know, removed from their houses. Once they're removed, then we have a serious problem about where they go. And the fastest growing population of homeless in Broward County are seniors. What we're trying to do now is we're focusing on, as I said, eviction prevention. We're focusing on expansion of services. And the third thing is affordable housing, because the way you solve a homeless crisis is through affordable housing. So we're moving there, and we're focusing on seniors We have expanded services, as I said, for eviction. We've added a team that we're funding at Coast to Coast Legal Aid in Broward County specifically for seniors. Before we were doing kind of everybody, but now we have a specific team that's going to focus on seniors. We're expanding services, rental assistance, so that people can stay in their apartments or condos for short periods of time. And then the ultimate part of it is affordable housing. And I wanted to just say that right now we have several examples of developments that we are working on that have been funded and are moving forward that are specifically for seniors. One in particular was a new one that's going to be a 92-unit affordable housing just for seniors. And we have several of those kind of on the drawing boards right now. What we have done is, some of you may remember, you know about the Sadowski Fund, which was passed many years ago, and we thought that all that money would be coming to us for affordable housing in our communities. So we don't get, in Broward County, I can say we don't get very much from that. So we passed back in 2018 an affordable housing trust fund for Broward County. And since then, we have put in about $150 million has gone in there specifically, because anything that goes in there, it's a lockbox, unlike Sadowski. Anything that goes in there must be spent for affordable housing. And I would recommend that is something any county could try and do to expand the money that they have available for affordable housing. And we use it for gap financing, which gives us the opportunity to make a deal viable. And we have so many developers coming now, to actually kind of bid on these things. So we're excited about that. Is it, an instant, solution? No, but we believe that it is the long-term solution. So for those three things together, we feel we can make a difference. So I'll wait with some of these others for.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Laura, would AARP have some definitive recommendations concerning both the need for home and community-based services and housing?
Yes, absolutely. Do you mind if I get the clicker? Thank you.
We have your clicker.
Thank you so much. There we go. I think we've covered this. But to get to that quality of life measure, yes, what we hear over and over and over at AARP constantly is that 8 in 10 older adults want to live independently. They want to live in their homes. They want to age in place. And why shouldn't we? We helped build these communities. We helped build these neighborhoods. We raised our children here, so you can understand why we want to stay in these communities. But when we ask older adults, what do you want when you're looking in communities? This is an example. We looked at the amenities that they're looking for. Over 60% of all adults want to live in either an urban, suburban, or smaller town areas that are a short drive, or walking distance to shops, offices, and services. So I think when you really think about what do our communities, are they prepared for this? Some of the challenges that we definitely see is transportation. I know we haven't spoken as much about that yet this morning, but most older adults will outlive their ability to drive by 7 to 10 years. So what options do we have in our community to get back into these shops, healthcare, see our friends, cheer our grandchildren on at school? And then housing, it's definitely been touched upon, but when we look at our housing stock that we have, over half of the households are 1 or 2 persons. We see more people living alone. But more than 85% of our housing stock is 2, 3, or 4 bedrooms. In the same community preference survey I have here, we found that 75% of all adults wanted to live in an area with better housing choices and more affordable housing options. And so how are we looking at this at AARP? We've been working for the last decade on how we can make our communities more livable for people of all ages. And through that work, we have been working with over 900 communities across the country, 10 states, 43 communities here in Florida, 20 of those here in South Florida. I see some leaders in the audience right now. And this work has a really big focus on the built environment, looking at the transportation, housing, outdoor places, and the social environment, the engagement, the inclusion. What really drove us in this work The driving factor was isolation and making sure that we are not isolated. And making sure you have connections to healthcare. And since we've been doing this work, what we're really seeing as positive next steps is nationally, many of the municipal plans are now integrating an aging lens in their work. So they're comprehensive plans, they're thinking about older adults in all the pieces through the transit, the bike pedestrian, land development, zoning, and disaster resilience. So really thinking about this from an older adult's perspective. And what does that look like? What does that translate? When I talk about transportation, we've been advocating for years for policies to make our roads more complete, safer, have more transportation options. And I just wanted to give a few examples of what that's looking like. On the left is a picture of one of our amazing volunteers here today who has done countless walk audits in his community with other older adults to look at what changes could be made so that we have that active transportation piece. And I think to a question we had earlier today about staying healthy, we also have to make sure we have options to get out to the parks, to go for walks that are safe. So this is a piece of that puzzle. And since 2017, AARP has been providing small challenge grant projects back into the communities to help move this work forward. I'm proud to say we funded over 53 in the state of Florida so far. These are two examples of those, one in Deerfield Beach here in Broward, and then the other one was last year in Tallahassee. And what I loved about this project, it just won an award from the National Counties Association. They worked with elementary school kids and a senior living facility, and they came together to paint the sidewalk, the intersection, to make it safer. So really looking at this, that what we're doing, it's so important to look at these small changes because it makes a huge benefit for all ages. For the 8-year-old, I'm now pushing around a double stroller, so I want to make sure I have a sidewalk that's safe. To the 80-year-old, we're all looking for these same things. And today, one of the biggest things we've been working on has been brought up is housing. We know it's a huge piece of the puzzle to look at how do we provide more affordable housing, and we've been advocating for more missing middle housing, and that's the housing that exists between a continuum of the single detached family home to the high-rise condos. It's the housing in the middle so that we have more options for those folks that are maybe living on their own. And one of the options of missing middle is accessory dwelling units. An ADU is an independent housing unit. It's typically created on a single family lot, or it's a detached dwelling. And so why is AARP looking at this? Well, we get asked that. Well, we've been looking at this because when you think about an ADU, it can really be used in many ways as the owner's needs and life circumstances change from housing a relative, caregiver, supplemental income to workforce housing. So we have a table here today, and as you can see, we have a whole suite of information at AARP that's available for local leaders. We have a local statewide missing middle ordinance that many communities have adopted pieces of in their own community. We have one for ADUs that can be adopted, and then we have an ABCs of ADUs for those of you who are not a planner, like I'm not a planner, that we can go out and talk about what this one piece of housing could look like. And then this summer, we just finished a ADU study of the state of Florida, and we looked at housing, that policy throughout the state. We looked at also tax implications, so if you're interested in learning more about that report, we have that at our table as well. And some things that we're still looking at and really focused on is, and it was touched upon earlier today, is looking at your house. Does it fit your needs? Is it being made for you? So we're going to be releasing some universal design ordinances to really look at when we're building homes, are we making them so that you can in fact stay and age in place? Because many of our housing stock today is made for a 30-year-old. I believe it's less than 1% of houses are accessible for older adults. So that's another huge piece. And then tying these two together, recently we've been looking at transit-oriented development. How are we looking at the transportation and building it with the housing if you do have to turn in those keys? So we have some of that will be coming out shortly for AARP. And we have a lot of resources, a lot of information. I wanted to put this up there. We have over 20 free publications if you're ever having a meeting and you want something like that ABC of ADUs, we can send a box of that information to your community. And then one link I didn't put here, but some homework to go home tonight, is we do have a livability index that we launched actually in Miami-Dade the first time we did it. And it looks at data that goes all the way from your neighborhood to your city to your county. And it's based on national data sets, so it doesn't have all your local data looking at your recreation rates, but you can go and just get an idea of where you fall on that livability index. So I have this and information at the table for anybody that wants to see some of those materials that we're working on at ARP.
Mayor Rich.
Yeah. I just would like to add a couple of things. This is on and on. Is it on? Yeah. Back in February, our county commission passed what we call the Housing Broward, a 10-year action plan for affordable housing. And it provides a critical policy framework for addressing Broward's affordable housing crisis. The theme of it was called Leading the Challenge, Sharing the Burden. And the sharing the burden is we're leading the challenge, the county commission, but we need to share the burden with everybody in our community. And it was developed through a partnership with FIU, Miami, FIU's Metropolitan Center, and Dr. Ned Murray. So it provides a coordinated, integrated approach that connects affordable housing to the critical planning going on in the county that deals with economic development, land use, transportation, infrastructure, and climate change. We had 60 focus groups while we were developing this. Every sector of the community was invited to come, participate, let us know what their needs were. So obviously we had one of your speakers shortly, Charlotte Mather-Taylor was on one of those focus groups, and we had that for seniors and other populations. And we learned that the problem, very often you hear teachers, police, firefighters. Well, yeah, they're part of it, but the truth is that across the board, everybody needed it. Over 60% of residents in Broward County are cost burdened, which means they're spending 30% of their income, more than 30% of their income on housing, and half of those were spending 50% of their income on affordable housing. So you can see the breadth of the crisis. So what we really feel is that we must bring everybody together. So we have hospital districts. Right now, our hospital districts are looking at building affordable housing because they have nurses, others, employees that absolutely can't find housing. And the same thing is happening all across the board. Our educational institutions, our school district, we're finally getting quite a number of our municipalities to come forward. We have 31 municipalities in Broward County. I'm not going to tell you that all of them are going to do this, but we now have got probably about 8 or so that are really good partners and willing to build. And we don't do zoning. The cities do zoning. We do land use. So we need to collaborate with the cities. And that's kind of I guess the motto for this whole thing is collaboration, so that we can all work together to solve this problem, because no one person, no one group is going to solve this problem. And we just need to have everybody at the table. And I think, as I say, affordable housing, it's really, for me, especially with the aging, it's the cornerstone of dignity and being able to live your life in the way in which you would like to. So we're going to continue to focus on that. And so far, we're upwards of over 6,000 units since we started this. We are a built-out community. Everybody is not the same. Here that's sitting here today. We cannot build single-family homes to get out of this problem. We have to build multifamily units, and that's the direction that we're going. And I think we're making significant progress, but it's a long road ahead. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thus far, we've talked about financial security, home and community-based services and long-term care, affordable housing. All of these issues have an impact on one of the most significant and growing problems, and I think you touched on it earlier, Mayor Rich. We certainly feel it in Miami-Dade County every day, and that is the increasing number of older homeless. Would any of the panel like to address solutions going forward to those issues, to that issue?
Well, you should have been listening to our county commission meeting the other day. Yeah. We are, everybody is struggling. We don't have enough shelter beds. There was a terrible piece of legislation, in my opinion, that passed the legislature last year, House Bill 1365, which criminalizes homeless. And in January, we know that we are up against the wall here, because in January you'll have people coming forward to sue municipalities or counties. So we're trying very hard now to expand our shelters and transitional housing. Affordable housing I've just discussed. I see Tracy there, and Hollywood is one of the cities that has really stepped up to the plate to affordable housing. Didn't used to, but they are now. One of the things we've done, just to say, and since Senator Geller is sitting here too, because I was on the planning council at the time, but he brought forward this amendment for transit-oriented, to build along the transit corridors and give density bonuses for that. And we are beginning to do that, because there was a whole discussion here about seniors not driving, but needing to be able to connect to transportation. So that's one of the things. So we're looking for homeless, we're looking at expanding shelters, our shelters, utilizing them a little more efficiently. We will, it didn't happen at the board meeting, but we will pass what's called a pallet shelter, which is transitional. There are about 120 of them around the country. They're like a little community, a little kind of village. Again, you need a city, because we have very little land that's not included in a city. Someone has to agree to the zoning, but we believe we'll be able to do that. And we're going to have a pallet shelter, which is, as I said, transitional, but they are individual homes. I don't know how many of you know about them, but people stay there usually a maximum of 90 days, although our shelter has been a little longer because of the fact that we don't have enough transitional or affordable housing. So that's why we're working on that end of it. But there are many of them. Tampa started one several years ago in conjunction with the Archdiocese of Tampa, and they have over 100 units there. And it's like a congregate living, but it's individual. People go in, and we did focus groups on this with homeless on the street, asking them if they would go into one of these. And to a person, they said yes. Why? Because it's a tiny home, and you walk in, and it's private, and you can lock the door, and it has a bathroom in it. And the only thing that's congregate is the laundry and the feeding. So that's something that we're moving to respond to that bill. But we work very hard to get our seniors out of shelters quickly, I can tell you that, and to try and place them into transitional and then affordable housing. But it's part of the same problem, but it's just exacerbated because of the age, and the and the problems that exist with seniors, that they really need a lot more attention. So
thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to comment on that?
Just add, we at Tax Watch, we like to study and measure things that work and then replicate those instead of starting all over. And so on the traditional homelessness issue in particular, Ron Book and his efforts in Miami, enormously successful and something that we should try to replicate around the state. And Broward County has been a real leader, really talking about housing affordability, because it's more than just the housing itself. It's the taxes, it's the property insurance, and all the rest. So this is a new and emerging problem with the elderly population finding themselves outside of homes. But it gets back to what Senator Rich mentioned a while ago. I really think this is where it's got to start, from the grassroots, and really for the citizenry to demand action, not hope that it happens, but to demand action.
Laura, did you want to add to that?
Yes,
Then
I want to
we'll
add
go
to
to
that.
the professor.
So two things. one about the what can a community do, and I know at ARP we showed our resources, the 80s missing middle, but we know that's just one piece of a bigger puzzle. It's really looking at what your community looks like and what makes sense based on your community. But we're just trying to look at ways that we can put forward policy that communities may be able to take a piece of that. And then one of the most important things that I want everybody to take away too is the power of these roundtables and hearing from our older residents and hearing what their needs are. That's what really started our age-friendly work. The very first thing we do with a community is they go and listen to the residents across the community to hear what is working, and I think that is also something with our transportation, our housing planning, to make sure at the very beginning that we're hearing from those residents.
Professor.
Yeah, I mean, my contribution to this is obviously the seriousness of our elderly Americans and finding that more and more of them might be facing homelessness. For me, again, bringing it back to the issue of financial security and resources, we find ourselves in the crisis. We try to address the crisis. It's harder for policymakers to think to the future and plan for something that maybe they think is still 20 to 30 years away, and maybe it's somebody else's problem. But again, I think this comes down to resources, where we have too many elderly Americans who really heavily rely on Social Security. Social Security actually often does not keep you out of poverty, and they have nothing else to rely on in terms of resources. Health costs are enormous. One terrible health situation combined with the fact that you have little or nothing other than Social Security leaves you very financially vulnerable. And so there is this sort of higher order of how can we avoid this over the longer term while we're trying to provide services and deal with affordable housing and deal with those who are in a crisis and need shelter, perhaps short-term or even longer term. But again, I would say, what should we do as a nation to deal with the original vision of Social Security? It was never meant to be the sole source of income. It was meant to help keep people out of poverty. It's not accomplishing that. Our Washington policymakers need to deal with Social Security. You heard Randy talk about that. The hope is that they will, and we won't see significant benefit cuts or significant increases in taxes, but something is going to happen. And some of those discussions are around maybe ways that Social Security can, in fact, achieve that original vision of keeping seniors out of poverty. But again, it is not enough. And there is always the plan that there are to be multiple pillars of financial security and a stool for retirement. That stool does not exist in the United States. It's not a strong one. And we need to work to rebuild that and provide workers who work hard all of their lives to have the ability to save for retirement, to provide financial education, provide them with the information, to envision that life in the future. How do you want to live it? And I'm sure for many of them, that vision is not to be 75 years old and to be homeless. So we need to do more now. We need to be doing it sooner. Yes, we need to help those who are old now, but we want to make this better over the longer term, and we need to focus on our younger generations. Not everybody has parents who are well educated and who can help them set up an IRA and tell them to just start saving money. I didn't have that. I learned it through other ways, and a lot of young people today, that is also still the case. So as a society, what are we going to do with our younger generations to help them look forward to where they could live to be 100 and live a life of dignity as they age? And we need to start with our younger populations in our schools, in our colleges, and just generally in our society and culturally, to build a culture of savings. And from a policy perspective, stop making it easy through a lot of our government policies for people to in fact go into debt and to subsidize that debt, which we do really, really well. But for some reason, in the work that I've been doing, trying to help people make it easier for them to save versus going into debt, we find a lot more challenge in doing that.
Thank you very much. One of the overarching issues that affect all of the issues that we've been talking about this morning are the availability of caregivers. Caregivers who are family, friends, paid caregivers. We probably need to do much more in terms of supporting our caregivers, particularly our informal caregivers. I'm wondering if any of the panel might have some suggestions going forward on how to address that issue. Laura?
I just wanted to add, we had a report recently to kind of give you what that number looks like here in Florida. We have close to 2.7 million caregivers. They're giving 2.6 billion hours of care per year. That's $40 billion of unpaid labor. And they're spending out of pocket over $7,200 a year for caregiving. So, some of the ways to look at that is how to help with some of the burden that these caregivers are providing, this unpaid labor force that we have here in Florida, really recognizing that.
Mayor Rich, did you want to add to that?
I can't say much more than that. The need is overwhelming, and we know after COVID it became even worse, and we haven't really rebounded from that yet. And part of it is wages, obviously. A lot of them not getting Social Security benefits. I mean, these are things that need to be need to be addressed. I was. I feel extremely fortunate because my mother passed away October 29th of this year, and she was 102. And she had all of her faculties. She was amazing, very strong-willed, and she lived in a lovely building that was independent in the Aventura area of Miami. And we were fortunate enough, she was fortunate enough that she was able to have aids. And one of the things, that I said was when we knew she needed to have them, not for her mind, but for her body, was, we need to pay them Social Security and make sure that there's something there for them at the end of this, and we did. But I have to tell you, it's not the norm. It's not the norm, and it needs to be. Because as you were just saying, I mean, you can't build any kind of future if you don't have some kind of resources. Exactly. So I just think these are, again, I think, we can look at them on an individual level, but I go back to, again, the state looking at ways to require this to happen, and we know it's hard. It's hard to do that because they've been looking at it for years. But the end result is that we're not doing the right thing, and we're not able to recruit the quality and the number of people that we need to take care of this increasing elderly population. So.
Just you hate to sound doom and gloom and everything, but we also have a shortage of nurses and doctors, which means by necessity we have to find other innovative ways to care for people. We're doing that more, moving more towards telehealth for medical care, telemental health. And so as I look at this model in the future of making sure people can age in place, having automated phone calls to remind people to take their prescription medicines, having regularly scheduled video conferences to check in on people, and providing vouchers to these family caregivers. They are, as Laura said, paying out of their own pocket, but they're also saving us as taxpayers an enormous amount of money. So I think we should calculate some of that savings and put that in a voucher program to help them offset and encourage them to care for their family members, because nobody's going to care for them better, and the elderly population will be far happier as well.
Very good. We have about a minute left before we open it up to the audience. We do have some interesting models in Florida for supporting caregivers. One that my colleagues over there and I administer is called Home Care for the Elderly, which provides small stipends to family members and friends to support their loved one in the home. We have a veterans-directed home care program where family members or friends of veterans also receive a small stipend to keep them at home and out of institutions. So something that all of our public officials might want to think about. How can we expand those programs? Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Rutman. First, in reference to Senator Rich's remarks, ditto. But my question is actually to Professor Antonelli. Although there's 7 counties in the 2 regional planning councils, the 3 largest population ones, Palm Beach is 1.5 million, Broward is 2, Dade is 2.6, aggregate at 6.1 million. Either Dade or Broward by themselves, not together, would be the 37th largest state, right behind New Mexico. Together, we're around just Dade, Broward, Palm Beach would be around, and that's not counting the other 4 counties, would be around the 17th largest state, right above Maryland and Missouri. So although I don't believe that the state is going to address a voluntary plan for have private employers set up retirement, the counties, I think, might be large enough to do that. And my question is, in your belief, could this be done by counties with a population of either 2.5 million, if you're looking individually, or in the aggregate over 6 million? Number one, could the counties do that? Number two, I don't think we would be able to make it mandatory on the employers, but I've been told that a lot of smaller employers in particular don't do it because they don't want to deal with the paperwork. So if the state was able, or excuse me, if the counties were able to set it up, not mandate it, but say, Joe's Pizzeria, if you want to set up for your, 8 or 13 employees, a IRA, we can help manage the paperwork, we can handle the enrollment, we can do all of this, but not mandatory, because I don't believe that we'd be willing to do that. Is that something that would work and would be helpful?
Okay, so could you do, so could the counties, yes. So what I didn't show you on that chart, I focused on the states, but we have had a couple of cities, municipalities, that enacted these types of programs. So we had New York City do it first, and then it drove, not surprisingly, New York State to move in the direction. They had a voluntary, and they moved to putting the requirement on employers to do that. And in Seattle, they passed an auto IRA program. In Washington State has now done an auto IRA program, so that municipalities no longer needed to go forward because they fall under the state. Although there was sort of a legal issue in Washington State around, I can't remember the regulatory issue in terms of financial institutions at the state level. So Seattle had a regulatory issue with the state that also made it difficult. Bottom line is yes. And that population is huge, and to your point, bigger than some of the other states. So that is certainly something at a county level that can be done. Now, voluntary versus a requirement, I don't want to get into. There's at the federal level, the Department of Labor as a regulator and employee benefit plans. So how you would structure a voluntary program to not trigger additional regulatory oversight from the federal government, something that is, again, a consideration. So the way these programs are structured, IRAs today, like if you go down to Fidelity and open a traditional IRA, it is not subjected to the same types of requirements and costs and burden in terms of paperwork that a full-blown employer 401k plan would be subjected to. So there are these regulatory and legal considerations, and I'd be happy to talk with policymakers, in the county or at the state level about those model options and how they would have to be designed based on what you think you would be able to do, either in the state or at the county level. But yeah, I appreciate it. Be happy to have that conversation. So, but yes, there are different ways there are different models and different ways that this can be structured, for sure. So I appreciate that consideration. But yeah, I didn't realize 6 million of the Floridians are in the 3
Other
counties.
questions from the floor for our panelists?
I don't need it. Sorry. So you may, if you were here earlier, you may have heard me say that my folks live with me. They're 89 and 92. I went from having no mortgage to now having a mortgage, having a very small electric bill to my pool bill being, my electric bill being $600 a month, so my mother will go in, which is her physical therapy. So, add all of the expenses that I'm incurring as the child, I'm not going after dollars for me, but if there's a program, how do we go about? We're being recorded. Sorry. Did the recording hear my question? A little. Okay. How does someone who is taking care of their elderly parents? How do we do that program that helps subsidize them?
Well, I think we start with the data, and you heard Laura, her data is very similar to ours on not only the number of people doing it, that's significant. We'll be close to 3 million people providing care for their family members in a few short years, and to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year. So with that kind of data, you can go to policymakers like Senator Harrell and demonstrate where we're saving the state money, and it's for a small percentage of that, creating a statewide program like we've heard there are some here locally, some voucher program or something to provide some relief. I think makes a lot of sense. And this isn't the only issue. There are 4 or 5 things we talked about today, all of which we're not really, it could almost be a zero-sum game, because of some of the money we're spending on nursing homes, and we start shifting that money to aging in place. I think a lot of it can pay for itself.
Another question here?
Thank you. It kind of piggybacks on what she was asking. I was curious because I know we have a lot of tax credits for children when parents have dependents. And I know I've asked around, and my own family had the same problem when it came to a parent becoming a dependent. One of them was going to lose. Like, the parent becoming a dependent had to lose certain benefits, sign over, certain rights or whatever to become a dependent. But to get the tax credit for the child who became the caregiver, is there anything happening with taxes that could, alleviate some of that, where it doesn't have to be so much of the parent giving over all of their rights, but then having some sort of a tax credit or some benefit that we could give to them without making them seem like a child, I guess, which there causes resistance for that.
Well, you're thinking the right way. We're actually in the middle of a study right now at Tax Watch on making tax policy work more for us with tax credits. One other example is child care. You know how enormously expensive that is, but what if an employer can get a tax credit and then help offset the cost of child care for the employee? What if the employer can get a tax credit if they provide some housing assistance so that their employee can afford housing? What if they provide help for an employee that's providing help to an elderly family member? So I think that's something that we really need to think hard on, using our tax policy to incentivize behavior that we all benefit from.
We have time for one final question.
I do have a question. Have there been any social studies on how the younger generation looks at the older generation in the sense of like their parents and whatnot? Because I like Commissioner Marino. I love my mom. She can move in with me. I love it. But the rest of the population, or at least my generation, I feel like is more of a kind of like they like to cut off the older generation if they do something that they're just not a big fan of. Have there been any studies on how that might affect our future?
I'm not sure I'm aware of studies. I just think, with younger generations and surveys that we're showing, there's just a lot of skepticism about the ability of government to deliver on its promises. So when we look at Social Security, a lot of young people today will say they don't think it's going to be around for them. And we do see that with the youngest generations right now, an increase in savings relative to their peers, older peers in the workforce. So, and you've heard things like FIRE, the FIRE movement, and being able to save and retire early and all of that kind of stuff. So, the younger generation, and with technology today, they're just able to get on their fingertips and their phones a lot more information. There are tools and apps to help do that, and those are all encouraging things. Out of all of what the states have initiated, state treasurers who are often leading this, it's really had an incredible impact in driving innovation in the private sector. So fintech, again, these tools that are being developed to really help younger generations learn about the importance of savings and what they want when they're older. So I think there's a lot of really encouraging stuff. So when we talk about state facilitated, again, this is state policy, and state is leaders and taking action, and what they do is shed a light on a problem. And it's really had a very positive impact in terms of the private markets and really driving some innovative change. And we need to keep doing that and focusing on the younger generations. But right now, I think a lot of younger folks are just really skeptical about the ability of government to be there for them. If that means that they're thinking, I need to take care of myself, okay, well, I don't think that's a bad thing. But are we gonna really be able to deliver on that? So, again, it's a great question. But I'm hopeful that if we can work with the younger generations, we can turn some of this around so that the policymakers today dealing with these really serious crises where it's too late. They're old, they're impoverished, they're heavily dependent on government to help them navigate their older years. And it's really challenging, and it's very expensive.
We are unfortunately out of time. It's break time. Thank you to all of our panelists. Great session.
Okay. Yes, as Max just said, it is a break time, 10-minute break. We'll get back underway at 11:30. We are precisely on time right now. While you're on break, visit some of our sponsors. We have United Home Care here. We also have AERP, and our APA chapter helped us get the AICP credits today.